Usually these things have some kind of airlock or entry port. Toby activated his scanner and began walking around the ship's perimeter. Though I suppose, usually, doesn't apply when you're dealing with your first alien spacecraft. The scanner began picking up energy signatures near what appeared to be a section of hull that was slightly different from the rest. As they approached, the metal began to shift and flow like liquid, forming an opening just large enough for humanoid figures to pass through. "That's either very convenient or a trap," Rodriguez observed, raising her weapon. "In my experience, convenient and trapped aren't mutually exclusive." Toby stepped through the opening, his universal translator crackling to life as it detected multiple communication frequencies. The interior of the ship was a marvel of organic architecture, with corridors that curved and branched like the inside of some vast organism. Bioluminescent panels provided soft lighting, and the air carried a faint scent of ozone and something that might have been alien flowers. They found the survivors in what appeared to be the ship's command center. The beings were humanoid but clearly non-human, with elongated limbs, skin that held an iridescent quality, and eyes that were entirely too large for their faces. Several were unconscious, while others worked frantically at control panels that responded to touch with colors rather than sounds. One of the conscious aliens turned as they entered, and Toby's translator immediately began processing their speech patterns. "More primitives," the being said, though the translation software added emotional context suggesting disappointment rather than hostility. "This world harbors only the barely evolved." "Charming bedside manner," Toby muttered, then raised his voice. "I'm Tobias Kellerman, and this is Security Chief Rodriguez. We're from the human colony nearby. Your ship crashed, and we're here to offer assistance." The alien studied him with those unsettling large eyes. "I am Commander Zara, 9 of the Zephyrian Confederation. We require no assistance from species that have yet to achieve dimensional travel. Right now, species that haven't achieved dimensional travel are the only help you're going to get," Rodriguez pointed out. "So you might want to reconsider your attitude." Toby moved to one of the control panels, noting the way energy patterns flowed through the organic circuits. "Commander, what's your ship's status? Our sensors detected some concerning power fluctuations. Our quantum drive was damaged when we emerged from hyperspace. The dimensional cascade created feedback loops that compromised our primary systems." Zara 9's expression suggested she was explaining advanced physics to a particularly slow child. "Quantum drive, dimensional cascade, feedback loops," Toby repeated thoughtfully. "So essentially, your engine exploded and now nothing works properly." That is a crude but essentially accurate assessment. Toby began examining the damaged systems, noting similarities to principles he recognized from human quantum mechanics. The good news is that the fundamental physics look familiar. The bad news is that your technology is about 3 centuries ahead of anything I've worked with before. "Then you cannot help us," Zara 9 said with finality. "I didn't say I couldn't help you. I said your technology was advanced." Toby pulled out his own diagnostic equipment and began interfacing it with the alien systems. Sometimes the best way to fix something complicated is with something simple. You cannot seriously intend to repair Zephyrian quantum technology with primitive human tools. Watch me. Toby's equipment began displaying readouts that made him smile. Your quantum matrix is destabilized, but the core principles are sound. I just need to create a stabilization field using a completely different approach than your original designers intended. Rodriguez watched as Toby began connecting human technology to alien systems with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he did this sort of thing every day. Has he always been this crazy? Zara 9 asked. Pretty much, Rodriguez replied. Though usually the things he fixes don't belong to species that could probably vaporize our entire planet. We would not vaporize your planet, Zara 9 said. It would be wasteful. Reassuring, Toby called from inside the quantum drive housing. Though you might want to reconsider that position in about 60 hours. What happens in 60 hours? Toby emerged from the drive housing, his face grim. According to your long-range sensors, that's when the devourers will arrive. The word devourers had the immediate effect of making every conscious Zephyrian in the command center stop what they were doing and stare at Toby with expressions that suggested he'd just announced the heat death of the universe. You accessed our sensor logs, Zara, 9 said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that came from accepting inevitable doom. Your quantum drive isn't the only thing I fixed, Toby replied, still buried in the alien technology. Though I have to say, your people's approach to data security could use some work. I've been reading your files for the past 20 minutes. The devourers do not negotiate, do not retreat, and do not leave survivors, Zara, 9 explained. They are machines that consume entire worlds to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. Rodriguez frowned. Machines? Like robots? Like a virus made of metal and malevolent intelligence, another Zephyrian added. They adapt to any strategy, overcome any defense, and leave nothing but empty space where civilizations once stood. Cheerful, Toby observed. Any idea why they're following you? We are the last survivors of the Zephyrian resistance fleet, Zara, 9 said. Our homeworld fell 6 months ago. Since then, we have been searching for a place to make our final stand. And you thought a human mining colony would be a good choice. We thought this system was uninhabited. The presence of primitive settlements was unexpected. Toby finally emerged from the quantum drive, wiping his hands on a cloth that was already stained with substances that probably didn't exist in any human chemistry textbook. Well, the good news is that your drive is now functional. The bad news is that even at maximum speed, you can't outrun a fleet that's already in hyperspace and knows your destination. Then we will die here, Zara, 9 said with the resignation of someone who had accepted this outcome months ago. Or, Toby said, we could try something else. The emergency planning session took place in the colony's main conference room, which had never been designed to accommodate representatives from 2 different species planning their mutual survival. Administrator Chen looked like someone who had signed up for mining operations and accidentally enrolled in an interstellar war, while the Zephyrian military officers studied human tactical displays with barely concealed skepticism. Our defensive capabilities are essentially non-existent, Security Chief Rodriguez reported. We have mining lasers that could probably scratch their hull paint, and a perimeter shield that's designed to keep out dust storms, not alien invasion fleets. The Zephyrian ship has weapons, Zara, 9 added, but not enough to engage an entire devourer fleet. At best, we might destroy 2 or 3 vessels before being overwhelmed. So we're looking at certain annihilation versus slightly delayed certain annihilation, Chen summarized. Outstanding. Toby had been quiet during the tactical briefings, instead studying the devourer attack patterns from the Zephyrian databases. Actually, I think everyone is approaching this problem from the wrong direction. What do you mean? Zara, 9 asked. You're thinking like military strategists trying to win a conventional battle. But this isn't a conventional situation. Toby activated the holographic display, showing devourer fleet movements over the past several years. Look at their patterns. They're incredibly sophisticated, but they're also incredibly predictable. Predictable how? They adapt to whatever strategy their opponents use, then optimize counter-strategies based on observed behavior. It's like fighting a chess computer that learns from every move you make. Rodriguez leaned forward. So how do you beat a computer that learns? You don't play chess. Toby began highlighting anomalies in the devourer data. You play a completely different game that doesn't follow any rules they can recognize. The Zephyrian tactical officer, a being whose name translated as something like strategic thunder, made a sound that the universal translator interpreted as skeptical laughter. You propose to defeat the most dangerous force in the galaxy with chaos? I propose to defeat them with controlled chaos, which is entirely different. Toby pulled up schematics of the mining colony. They're expecting either a military response or an evacuation attempt. What they're not expecting is for us to turn this entire mining operation into the galaxy's largest improvised weapon. Explain, Zara, 9 commanded. Our mining equipment is designed to crack asteroids and extract materials from planetary cores. With some modifications, it could do the same thing to starships. Toby began overlaying his calculations on the colony schematics. We use the mining lasers as primary weapons, the excavation charges as improvised torpedoes, and the processing facilities as manufacturing centers for whatever we need. That is insane, Strategic Thunder observed. Insane enough that their adaptive algorithms won't see it coming, Toby agreed. Plus, we have one advantage they don't expect. Which is human creativity backed by Zephyrian technology. Toby's grin was sharp enough to cut metal. They've been fighting conventional military forces for centuries. They've never fought a mining operation that decided to go to war. The next 48 hours transformed the mining colony into something that would have given weapons inspectors nightmares and safety engineers nervous breakdowns. Human engineering improvisation combined with Zephyrian technical precision to create defensive systems that existed in the gray area between genius and madness. Mining lasers were recalibrated to penetrate starship armor. Excavation charges were modified with Zephyrian quantum enhancement to create explosives that could damage ships in hyperspace. The atmospheric processors were converted into signal jammers that would interfere with Devourer communication networks. This should not work, Strategic Thunder observed, watching human technicians install Zephyrian targeting systems on equipment designed to mine asteroids. Most of the best ideas shouldn't work, Toby replied, checking the power coupling on a laser array that now had enough output to melt a small moon. That's what makes them effective. When the Devourer scouts arrived, they found a mining colony that greeted them with weapons fire from directions their tactical computers insisted were impossible. Mining equipment that shouldn't have been able to target fast-moving vessels tracked them with perfect accuracy. Excavation charges that had no business existing in space detonated around their ships with devastating effect. 3 scout vessels were destroyed in the first engagement, and the survivors retreated to wait for the main fleet while presumably running very confused diagnostic routines. It worked, Zara, 9 said, her voice carrying disbelief that suggested she was still processing what she'd witnessed. The first part worked, Toby corrected. Now comes the really difficult bit. Which is convincing the main fleet that a mining colony just destroyed their advanced scouts using weapons that don't exist and tactics that make no sense. Toby began preparing for the next phase of his plan. Because if we've confused them enough, they might just make the kind of mistake that turns certain defeat into improbable victory. And if we haven't confused them enough, then we'll have died in the most creatively destructive way possible, Toby replied cheerfully. Which isn't the worst epitaph a maintenance engineer could ask for. News of the successful defense spread through the galactic communication networks with the speed that only truly impossible events can achieve. Within 18 hours, representatives from 7 different alien civilizations had arrived in the system, their ships appearing with the kind of urgency usually reserved for natural disasters or clearance sales. This is getting out of hand, Administrator Chen observed, watching the latest arrivals on the command center's main display. We went from having no alien contact to hosting what appears to be an interstellar convention. Toby was attempting to explain his defensive strategy to a group of military officers whose species ranged from crystalline energy beings to creatures that looked like armored bears with too many arms. The key is understanding that adaptive intelligence has predictable limitations. If you consistently behave in ways that don't follow logical patterns, the adaptation algorithms eventually crash trying to process contradictory data. You defeated Devourer scouts by confusing their computers, asked General Thex of the crystalline hegemony, whose voice sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. I defeated them by making their computers think they were hallucinating, Toby corrected. There's a subtle but important difference. Commander Voss of the Plasma Quartz, a being whose skin constantly shifted between different states of matter, leaned forward with interest. Show us. Toby activated his holographic display, showing the engagement from multiple perspectives. The Devourers arrived expecting either military resistance or evacuation attempts. Instead, they encountered mining equipment behaving like military hardware, civilian installations generating military-grade firepower, and tactical responses that violated every principle of strategic logic. Their adaptive systems attempted to categorize our responses and failed, Zara 9 added. The contradiction between observed capabilities and predicted behaviors created processing loops that degraded their combat effectiveness. Fascinating, whispered Ambassador Kree of the Void Walkers, whose species existed partially outside normal spacetime. We have been fighting defensive wars for centuries, trying to match their adaptability with superior strategy. Superior strategy is exactly what they're designed to counter, Toby explained. But they can't adapt to strategy that isn't actually strategy at all. The assembled military leaders began asking questions that revealed the scope of the Devourer threat. Entire civilizations had fallen to the mechanical plague. Billions of beings had been consumed to fuel the machine's expansion. The galaxy's most advanced military minds have been trying to solve the problem for decades. We have deployed quantum weapons, dimensional barriers, even weapons that attack their programming directly, reported Admiral Zephan of the 7th Fleet Alliance. Nothing has proven effective for more than a few engagements. Because you're fighting them on their terms, Toby said. They're designed to be the ultimate military opponent. But they're not designed to deal with opponents who don't follow military logic. You propose that entire fleets adopt random tactics? General Thex asked. I propose that fleets adopt human tactics, Toby replied. Which, from the perspective of military computers, is essentially the same thing. The next several hours involved Toby attempting to teach the concept of creative chaos to military minds that had spent centuries perfecting the art of logical warfare. The results were both encouraging and terrifying. So when faced with a superior force, your species' instinct is to attack using whatever is available rather than retreat to regroup? Admiral Zephan asked. Pretty much, Security Chief Rodriguez confirmed. It's not always the smartest approach, but it's definitely consistent. And when conventional weapons are insufficient, you modify civilian equipment for military purposes? We modify whatever we can find, Toby said. Humans have been turning household items into weapons since we discovered fire. It's one of our few consistent cultural traits. The Void Walker ambassador materialized more fully into normal spacetime, a process that made reality ripple around the edges. Your species approaches conflict with what we might call aggressive improvisation. That's probably the nicest way anyone has ever described human warfare, Rodriguez observed. It may also be the most effective approach to defeating the Devourers, Admiral Zephan added. Our intelligence networks indicate the main fleet is proceeding more cautiously than usual. The loss of their scouts has apparently created uncertainty in their tactical algorithms. Uncertainty is good, Toby said. Uncertainty means they're operating outside their comfort zone. And when machines operate outside their comfort zone, they start making mistakes. General Thex's crystalline form pulsed with colors that the universal translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration. What would you require to implement these tactics on a larger scale? Volunteers willing to try approaches that most military academies would classify as insanity, Toby replied. Plus access to whatever equipment and resources you can provide. And you believe this approach could succeed where conventional strategy has failed? I believe it's worth trying, Toby said. Because the alternative is accepting defeat against an enemy that's already conquered half the galaxy. The planning session that followed redefined the concept of military strategy by essentially abandoning it entirely. Instead of battle plans, they developed creative response frameworks. Instead of tactical formations, they designed chaos coordination protocols. Instead of conventional weapons deployment, they created improvised force multiplication scenarios. This is either the most brilliant military innovation in galactic history, or we are all about to die in the most spectacular way possible, observed Commander Voss. Both possibilities remain open, Toby agreed. Though I should mention that the main Devourer fleet is scheduled to arrive in 6 hours, so we're about to find out which one it is. The assembled fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Zephyrian warships flew in formation with crystalline energy constructs. Plasma court vessels shared tactical data with Void Walker ships that existed partially outside normal reality. Human mining equipment floated alongside alien weapons platforms in configurations that made no strategic sense and were therefore impossible to counter. All vessels report ready, Zara 9 announced from the command center they'd established aboard the mining station. Define ready, Admiral Zephyr requested. Armed with weapons that shouldn't exist, operating under tactics that contradict basic military logic, and crewed by beings whose primary qualification is their willingness to try something that's never been attempted before, Toby replied. In other words, perfectly prepared for a battle that no one knows how to fight. That is either very reassuring or absolutely terrifying, General Thex observed. Why not both? Toby asked, watching as hyperspace distortions announced the arrival of the main Devourer fleet. The enemy ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting no light as they arranged themselves in attack patterns refined through the conquest of 1,000 worlds. They were beautiful in their mechanical precision, terrifying in their unified purpose, and absolutely unprepared for what happened next. The Allied fleet's opening move was to split into groups and attack from directions that violated several principles of three-dimensional geometry. Mining equipment began engaging capital ships with weapons that existed in legal gray areas of physics. Alien vessels coordinated attacks using communication protocols that changed randomly to prevent adaptive countermeasures. Status report, Toby called out as the battle unfolded around them. Devourer fleet is attempting to implement standard adaptive countermeasures, reported the sensor technician. Success rate appears to be approximately 0%. Excellent. Keep doing whatever we're doing, but do it differently each time. That is the most contradictory tactical order I have ever received, Admiral Zephyr noted. Then it's working perfectly, Toby replied, watching as another group of Devourer ships fell victim to attacks they hadn't been programmed to anticipate. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in decades, the galaxy's defenders were winning against an enemy that had never known defeat. The final phase of the battle required Toby to do something that every survival instinct he possessed advised against, deliberately interface with Devourer consciousness to introduce what he optimistically called beneficial chaos into their collective intelligence. This is an exceptionally bad idea, Zara 9 observed as Toby prepared the neural interface equipment they'd improvised from human medical technology and Zephyrian quantum processors. Most of my best ideas have been exceptionally bad, Toby replied, calibrating the connection protocols. The trick is making sure they're bad in exactly the right way. The interface process felt like diving into an ocean made of mathematics and malevolent purpose. Devourer consciousness was vast, precise, and utterly alien in its mechanical perfection. It was also, Toby realized with a mixture of terror and excitement, completely unprepared for contact with a mind that operated on principles of creative chaos rather than logical optimization. He began introducing random variables into their tactical algorithms, inserting paradoxes into their strategic databases, and generally behaving like a virus made of pure human stubbornness. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Devourer fleet. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly began firing on each other as their targeting systems received contradictory data. Formation patterns collapsed as navigation computers attempted to process movement orders that violated the laws of physics. Command vessels issued instructions that their subordinates couldn't execute because the orders existed in logical impossibility. It's working, Admiral Zephyr reported from his flagship. Devourer fleet cohesion is degrading rapidly. Their adaptive systems appear to be experiencing cascading failures. Keep pressing the attack, Toby called out, his consciousness still partially merged with the enemy network. But maintain chaos protocols. The moment we become predictable, they'll adapt. The battle raged for another 3 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Ships that had conquered civilizations were being destroyed by mining equipment operated by species they had never encountered using tactics that violated every principle of warfare they understood. It was, by any objective measure, the most ridiculous military victory in galactic history. When the last Devourer vessel fell silent, floating dead in space with its adaptive systems permanently corrupted by exposure to pure human unpredictability, the assembled fleet found itself in the unusual position of having won a war that most military experts had considered unwinnable. Status report on Devourer threat assessment, General Thex requested. According to our analysis, Zara 9 replied, the corruption introduced to their collective consciousness will propagate through their entire network. Any surviving Devourer units will be operating with compromised systems that make them vulnerable to the same chaos-based tactics. So we've essentially given them a permanent case of military dyslexia, Rodriguez observed. That is a crude but accurate assessment, Admiral Zeffin confirmed. The victory celebration lasted 3 days and involved representatives from dozens of species who had never imagined they would live to see the Devourer threat eliminated. Toby found himself the center of attention for military leaders, scientists, and diplomats who wanted to understand how a maintenance engineer had accomplished what their best strategic minds couldn't. The secret, he explained to yet another group of alien military officers, is that there is no secret. Humans don't approach problems with predetermined solutions. We try things until something works, then we try to figure out why it worked. This approach seems highly inefficient, observed a representative from the logical consensus, a species whose entire culture was based on mathematical optimization. Inefficient, yes. But also unpredictable, which turned out to be more important than efficiency when fighting an enemy designed to counter efficient strategies. You will establish training academies to teach these methods? Asked Admiral Zeffin. I'll consult, Toby replied. But honestly, I think the best thing I can do is go back to my regular job and let other people worry about military applications. You would return to maintenance work after saving the galaxy. Someone has to keep the atmospheric processors running, Toby pointed out. Plus, I like fixing things. It's just that now the things I fix might occasionally include interstellar political crises. 6 months later, Toby was back on Kepler 442b, working on atmospheric processor number 7, which had developed what could charitably be called a personality disorder. His daily routine now included consultation calls from alien governments, requests for advice on impossible engineering problems, and the occasional visit from military officers who wanted to discuss the practical applications of controlled chaos in tactical situations. Toby, we have another situation, Administrator Chen announced through the comm system. What kind of situation? Toby asked, though he was already reaching for his tools. The Andromedans are claiming that their dimensional stabilizers are malfunctioning, and they want you to take a look because apparently you're the only person in the galaxy who fixes things by making them more chaotic rather than more organized. The Andromedans are from another galaxy entirely, Toby observed. How did they even hear about me? Apparently your reputation has spread beyond local space. Something about being the human who taught the universe that the best solution to any problem is to approach it sideways while making inappropriate jokes. Toby set down his quantum wrench and considered this development. Do they need me to travel to Andromeda, or are they bringing their broken dimensional stabilizers here? They're bringing their equipment here. Along with a delegation of scientists, a military escort, and what they describe as tribute appropriate for the Chaos Engineer. Chaos Engineer. Toby tested the title and found it surprisingly fitting. I suppose there are worse things to be famous for. Any regrets about becoming the galaxy's go-to expert on creative problem-solving? Toby looked out the window at the rust-colored landscape of Kepler 442b, then at the atmospheric processor that was currently humming with contentment thanks to a repair solution that had involved 3 different types of alien technology, a spare coffee maker, and what most engineers would consider dangerous improvisation. Only that it took me this long to realize that the best way to fix impossible problems is to ignore the fact that they're impossible, he replied. Though I have to admit, the job benefits have improved considerably since I started consulting for interstellar civilizations. Such as? Well, the coffee is much better now. Apparently the Zephyrians have excellent trade relationships with species that actually know how to grow decent beans. Toby picked up his tools and headed toward the newest crisis that required his particular brand of solution. Plus, it turns out that when you save the galaxy from mechanical apocalypse, people stop questioning your methods and start asking for your advice instead. And you're comfortable with being the person other species turn to when conventional solutions fail? Chen, I've been the person other people turn to when conventional solutions fail since I was 12 years old and fixed our family's broken air conditioner using spare parts from a kitchen appliance and a complete disregard for manufacturer warranties. Toby's grin held the same self-deprecating confidence that had characterized his entire improbable journey from maintenance engineer to galactic hero. The only difference now is that the air conditioners are occasionally sentient and the spare parts come from civilizations that mastered interstellar travel before humans discovered fire. That seems like a significant difference. Not really, Toby replied, heading off to solve whatever impossible problem awaited him. Broken is broken, regardless of how advanced the technology is. And the fundamental rule of fixing things remains the same: if it's not working, try something different until it does. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in patterns that now included regular traffic from dozens of species who had learned that sometimes the best solutions came from someone who approached problems with curiosity rather than preconceptions, humor rather than solemnity, and the absolute certainty that there was no such thing as an unfixable problem, only problems that hadn't yet met the right kind of creative chaos.